I moved into Willow Bend Estates 3 years ago, thinking I'd finally found peace. The kind of peace that comes from quiet streets, maple trees that whisper in the wind, and neighbors who wave from across the cul-de-sac. For the first few months, that's exactly what it was. Peaceful. I paid my HOA dues on time, kept my lawn trimmed, and minded my own business. My next-door neighbor, Cheryl Dalton, seemed friendly enough at first. Mid-50s, divorced, always wearing pastel cardigans and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. She baked muffins for new residents and made sure everyone knew she'd been here since the community was founded. I didn't think much of it. Every neighborhood has one. The self-appointed mayor who knows everyone's business. That illusion cracked the day I planted a row of small cedar shrubs along the side of my house. They weren't anything special, just something to give my backyard a little privacy. Cheryl came over before I'd even finished watering them. "You didn't submit an architectural request," she said, clutching her HOA rulebook like a Bible. I told her I wasn't changing the structure of my home, just planting trees on my property line. But she smiled that thin, artificial smile and said, "We'll see what the board says." The next week, I got a letter. Violation, unauthorized landscaping. Fine. $150. That was my first taste of what living next to Cheryl was really going to be like. I appealed the fine and thought it would end there. But she showed up at the next HOA meeting, sitting next to the board president, whispering like they were plotting something. A few weeks later, she was voted onto the board. Just like that, and from that moment on, everything I did, everything, became a problem. The mailbox I painted black, non-compliant color tone, the solar lights along my walkway, unauthorized illumination devices. Even the small flag I hung for Memorial Day, something every house on the street had, somehow violated a temporary display rule. I tried to laugh it off at first. Maybe she was just power-hungry. Maybe she was taking her new role too seriously. But then she crossed a line. One evening, I came home from work and found a group of HOA contractors in my front yard, digging up my flower bed. Cheryl was standing with her arms crossed, clipboard in hand, directing them like she was running a construction site. "What the hell is this?" I shouted. "Routine compliance maintenance," she said calmly. "You failed to remove the unapproved vegetation after multiple notices." Unapproved vegetation? They were tulips. I told the workers to stop and get off my property. Cheryl smirked, held up her phone, and said, "You're being aggressive. I'll be adding that to your homeowner record." That's when I realized she wasn't enforcing the rules. She was weaponizing them. Against me. The harassment continued for months. Letters, fines, warnings, and even an email accusing me of violating noise ordinances because my lawnmower was too loud. She'd stand at her window every weekend, filming me mowing my lawn or cleaning my gutters. One night around 11 p.m., I caught her walking along my driveway with a flashlight, taking photos of my trash cans. When I stepped outside, she jumped like a guilty teenager and stammered something about documenting non-compliance. I told her to leave. She said, "You'll regret that." The next morning, there was an orange notice taped to my garage door. Pending lien for unpaid HOA fines. That was it. I'd had enough. I started documenting everything. Every letter, every notice, every strange photo I caught her taking. I installed my own cameras, 4 of them, covering every angle of my property, and it didn't take long for them to catch something. 2 weeks later, I woke up to the sound of metal scraping near my fence line. When I checked the footage, I couldn't believe what I saw. Cheryl, my neighbor, an HOA board member, sneaking into my backyard with a tape measure and a clipboard. At 5:30 in the morning, she was measuring my deck. I immediately called the police and filed a trespassing report. The responding officer watched the video, looked at me, and said, "She's on the HOA board? Sir, that's not legal authority to enter private property." They gave her a warning, but that only made her angrier. A week later, I got a certified letter. Notice of violation. Unauthorized exterior structure. Deck expansion without approval. Fine. $500, except I hadn't expanded my deck. It was the same size it had been when I bought the house. Cheryl had simply decided it was illegal. That's when I hired an attorney, a calm, sharp woman named Melissa Grant who specialized in HOA disputes. I handed her my thick binder of evidence and she smiled and said, "Mr. Harris, I think it's time we remind the HOA what the law actually says." She sent a formal demand letter to the HOA board, outlining the harassment, the trespassing, and the unlawful fines. Within days, Cheryl started panic texting me from an unknown number. "You didn't have to get lawyers involved. We could have handled this like neighbors. Do you really want to make this ugly?" I didn't reply. Instead, I waited for the next HOA meeting. The room was packed that night. Cheryl sat at the center table beside the president, pretending to look calm, though her hands were shaking. My lawyer sat beside me with a folder full of photos, emails, and video clips queued on her laptop. When the floor opened for homeowner concerns, I stood up and said, "I'd like to discuss repeated acts of harassment and illegal trespassing by a sitting board member." You could hear a pin drop. Cheryl's face drained of color. Handed the president a printed copy of my evidence, timestamps, videos, and her own emails. My lawyer played the footage of Cheryl climbing over my fence with her tape measure. The gasps from the room were audible. Cheryl tried to speak. That's taken out of context. But the HOA president cut her off. "You entered his property at dawn." Cheryl stammered something about enforcing community aesthetics. Melissa stood and said firmly, "The HOA has no right of entry onto private property without consent or emergency justification. Your board member committed criminal trespass. Continued retaliation against my client will result in civil action." The president looked furious. Not at me, but at Cheryl. "We had no idea," he said. That meeting lasted 2 hours. By the end, Cheryl had been suspended from the board pending investigation. But I wasn't done. 2 weeks later, the county prosecutor contacted me. The police had forwarded my trespassing complaint and the video evidence. Cheryl was officially being charged with criminal trespass and harassment. When the hearing came, she tried to play the victim, saying I'd provoked her, that she was just following up on community concerns. But the footage didn't lie. The judge watched her sneaking around my yard in the early morning, clipboard in hand, and said flatly, "Miss Dalton, you're not a police officer. You're a neighbor who's crossed multiple lines." She was found guilty of misdemeanor trespass and fined $1,000 plus restitution for my legal fees. The HOA board formally removed her from her position and issued a written apology to me and every homeowner affected by her excessive enforcement tactics. But the best part came later. At the next community meeting, the new board president, a soft-spoken retired teacher named Harold, stood up and announced a new bylaw. No board member may conduct inspections or investigations on their own. All compliance visits must be pre-approved and accompanied by a third-party contractor. The room applauded. Cheryl moved out a few months later. I watched the moving truck pull away while sipping coffee from my porch, the same porch she once called non-compliant. For the first time in a long while, the street was quiet again. A few weeks after she left, I got a letter from the HOA. For a moment, my stomach dropped. Old instincts. But when I opened it, it wasn't a violation. It was a thank you. "Mr. Harris," it read, "your persistence and documentation helped us correct serious misconduct on our board. We appreciate your patience and your commitment to keeping Willow Bend Estates fair and lawful." I smiled for the first time in months. It had taken nearly a year of hell. Hundreds of photos, emails, and late nights wondering what new accusation would appear in my mailbox. But it was finally over. Justice had been served. Now, when I see the new HOA patrol drive slowly down the street, I don't feel dread. I just nod, because I know they're following actual rules, not one woman's grudge. Sometimes the quiet victory isn't just winning in court. It's sitting on your porch, hearing the birds, and knowing that no one's watching you through their blinds anymore. Morale. Power in the wrong hands can turn neighbors into enemies, but truth, patience, and evidence can turn it all back again.